Namaste, dear students of class 10. I am Tumpuri Shrivani from Bharatiya Vidya Bhavans, BHL, RC Hyderabad. Today, I am going to discuss a fictional story from the book Footprints Without Feet. And the title of the story is also Footprints Without Feet. H.G. Wells or Herbert George Wells is the author of this story, children, who was an English novelist, journalist, sociologist, and historian who is best known for his fiction novels, The Time Machine and The War of Worlds. So it's very important for us to remember the name of the author. So let us look into the brief introduction to this story, children. This is a fictional story of an eccentric and lawless scientist. It's very important for you to remember these words, children. Eccentric means unconventional. Okay, someone who is very strange or unconventional is called as eccentric. And of course, a lawless scientist, Mr. Griffin, who misuses his scientific discovery. So, we are going to see if a scientist doesn't possess certain qualities like being kind or being loyal or being empathetic or being compassionate, then how his scientific discovery can become a problem to the society can be understood by looking into this story. The lesson gives a message that misuse of science and its great discoveries can make even a brilliant scientist like Griffin a monster and a threatening, lawless person. Because of his lack of vision, because of his lack of virtues, this brilliant scientist, whose name was Griffin, turned into a monster and also a lawless person. So let us quickly look into the story now. Before we proceed, please remember, children, that Mr. Griffin is a scientist who discovers a drug which, when consumed, would make him invisible. Okay, from there the story begins. He consumes this drug, he becomes invisible, and then he burns the house of his owner and comes into the streets of London. While walking in a street, his footsteps are noticed by two boys who are in street, and they follow his footprints. From there the story begins. So let's start from there. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? So these two boys were staring in surprise at the muddy imprints. Imprints is nothing but probably Griffin stamped into mud, and when he was walking, these two boys were able to witness the mud, but they were not able to see whose imprints were there. Okay, and they started following this barefooted man, wondering where the man was. What did the man do? Where was he? Was a big question to the boys over there. As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. So, when they were following these footprints, they were really amazed to see that fresh footprints started appearing from nowhere. So, they started following the footprints. Further footprints followed, one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. So, where the steps were going, children, the steps were descending down the steps. Descending is nothing but coming down the steps, and they were progressing. That means walking down the street. And the boys, they found it fascinating, and they started following the footsteps. The boys followed fascinated until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter. So after a while, slowly these footprints started disappearing, and at last disappeared altogether. So slowly the footprints disappeared altogether. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. So the boys were bewildered. Bewildered means they were confused, they were puzzled, they didn't know. But the secret behind this mystery was that a scientist had just discovered a drug which would make him or his body transparent. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. So, with this, we can understand that Griffin was an intellectual scientist. Children, he performed many experiments and he wanted to prove that it was possible for human body to become invisible. So imagine, so this is very rare and he wanted to prove this. Finally he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. So Griffin became successful. He was able to prove, or he was able to discover a drug which when consumed turned a man into a invisible person. At the same time, this person remained very solid as a glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. So it's very important for you to remember, children, he was a brilliant scientist. He was very intellectual, but he did not follow any rules and regulations of the society. He was totally lawless person. And because of this, his landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. So his house owner, landlord is nothing but his house owner, did not like Griffin at all. And he tried to throw him out of his house. That is, eject him is nothing but to throw him out of his house. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. So you can just imagine, children, what kind of a person was Griffin. He set the house on fire because he wanted to take revenge on the landlord who wanted to throw him out. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. So, children, the condition to become invisible was that whoever consumed this drug, they had to remove their clothes. So, if they removed their clothes only, they would become invisible after drinking the potion. So that was the condition there. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer. So now Griffin became a homeless wanderer. Why he became homeless wanderer? Because he set the house on fire and his landlord was very angry with him and he threw him out into the streets, and hence Griffin became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. So, children, he did not have any money with him. He was not wearing any clothes, and he became invisible. And that's how he stepped into mud, and that's how those two boys looked at the muddy imprints of the scientist as he walked. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. So, Mr. Griffin was able to escape from the glaring eyes of the boys, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. So, what did Griffin do? He escaped from the glaring eyes of the boys, but his adventures were not over, children. He was roaming about streets in London, and it was very difficult for him to withstand the breeze because it was midwinter. It was bitterly cold, and he could not tolerate the chill weather. So, what did he do? He decided to go into a big London store where it was quite warm for him. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. So, what did Griffin do? He entered into this big store, and after everybody left the store, when he was all alone, he had the pleasure of clothing. That is, he started wearing the clothes that were there inside the store, and he started feeding food over there. And he did not have any regard for the expense because he was not paying for any of these to whatever he was doing in the store. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. So, what did he do? Happily, he broke open the boxes and he opened the wrappers and he took the warm clothes from the shop and he started wearing them. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. So, what did he do from that store? He took some shoes, he wore shoes, and he wore an overcoat, and also put on a wide brimmed hat, and now he became a totally dressed person. So, you all know, children, if he dressed, he would become visible to others. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. So he ate heartfully, children. He had cold meat, he had coffee, he also had certain sweets, he also had some nice wine. And then, when his tummy was full, he decided to take rest. So he decided to sleep on a pile of quilts. Pile is nothing but a stack of quilts. Quilts are nothing but warm rugs, are referred to as quilts. So he decided to take rest in the store because now his stomach was full and he was very tired and he was quite warm, and causally he went off to sleep. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in time, all might have been well. So when he settled down, he slept happily, but the next morning, children, he did not get up in time. It was time for the store to be open, and he was fast asleep. He did not get up in time to move out of the store. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. So, children, next morning he did not wake up in time, and some store assistants were coming. And when he looked at the store assistants, he got frightened. Panicked means he got frightened and he started to run because they would definitely catch hold of him thinking that he was a thief. So he started running out of the store. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. So, what did he do? He started running, and while he was running, he quickly removed his clothes so that he would become invisible, so that he could avoid being caught by the store assistants. And now he became naked. Again, he was exposed to the chill January air. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried the Drury Lane, the center of the theater world. So now, since again he was invisible, he decided to check out the theatrical company. Theatrical company is nothing but is the place where dramas are held or plays are held, right? So he decided to go into a company, and there he decided to look for some clothes, and he wanted to hide the empty space above his shoulders is nothing but he wanted to cover up his head, right, which was actually now transparent or invisible. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. So he was shivering and he ran into this Drury world or Drury Lane, which was a theatre world. Or this lane was filled with shops which sold theatrical products, right? So he went into the Drury Lane. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. So, in this Drury Lane, children, he decided to check into one suitable shop. Okay, he found a suitable shop. He went inside it, and then he took certain bandages there, and he wore it around his head, okay, covering his forehead, and dark glasses. He took false nose and big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. So, certain whiskers or false hair he took and put it on himself, and he also put on a large hat. And to escape without being seen, he carelessly attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. So you see, children, Mr. Griffin would have taken these things and probably escaped from there. But he doesn't do that. He goes and he carelessly, means very carelessly, he goes and attacks the shopkeeper and he robs money from him, and then he injures the shopkeeper and he runs away from there. So with this you can understand the mentality of Mr. Griffin, who was very wicked person.